Well, good evening. Welcome to our Energy on Tuesday night hangout being held on a Wednesday. So those of you who knew about it on Tuesday know that it was delayed. We had some technical problems, but we're back up and running. And tonight I'm going to be chatting with my wife, Jody, and partner in Energy on Publications. And we're going to be talking about grief. For us, we're particularly talking, that's the title, 12 Years Later. So before I get into some details here and also make a couple of announcements, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord, I thank you for this opportunity to talk about Christian living and about something that is in the experience of so many Christians. I pray that you'll be with us tonight. Let your Holy Spirit guide and direct, and let this be helpful to people in their Christian walk. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Well, before we get started here, Jody, I'm going to start with the first question. I do want to make the couple of announcements of what's coming up. Tomorrow night, I'll be starting the next series, which is on the Apostle Paul and the backgrounds and sources and interpreting. That's at 7 o'clock tomorrow night. That's on my personal YouTube channel. And that will be starting talking about the resources, and our resources that are related to that on energyondirect.com are on sale for 30% and more off. So this is a good time to pick up some materials, Bible study guides that related to Paul, his life, and his theology. So that's available. And then next Tuesday, my guest will be Bruce Epperly. Will be talking about Jonah, when God changes. So that's what's coming up right now. So let's start with this. When we say grief 12 years later, to some people that may sound like a long time, but I can tell you to some other people that probably doesn't sound like very long at all. So the open question as we start out, how long does grief last?
Well, I think that grief lasts like a journey. It's my son has a really great thing that he has reminded me many times, that in life that there are many things that are marathons. They're not a sprint. And I would say that grief is a marathon journey. It's something that you better pace yourself, because it's not going to be over in 3 days or 3 weeks or 3 months. And there are lots of factors that determine, I think, some of the acuteness of the grief. Things like the relationship that you might have. Grief can be the loss of a loved one. It can be the loss of your home. It could be the loss of your marriage. It could be the loss of your home, your job. And so it depends on, kind of what your relationship was to the loss, as to how long maybe the acuteness of it, of that grief, may last.
So there's probably then, let's just add in here, no good way to compare grief. In other words, like you go, my loss of X is more important or less important than your loss of Y. It's loss, and it's experienced in different ways and according to your experience.
No, when our James died 12 years ago, it was at the same time that Hurricane Ivan came through the Gulf Coast here. And, a lot of people that came to his life celebration were trying to not only deal with the fact that they were grieving for his loss in their life, but also that they were grieving the loss of their home. Most of the people, I think, probably at the celebration still didn't have full electricity back in their houses even. I know we got a little creative with some of our out-of-town guests because there were no motel rooms available. and one lady came up to me and with tears in her eyes, and she said, she says, I was just thinking, the other day I was walking around, they'd had a tree fall into their garage, and she says, and I was so upset because we lost so many trees, beautiful trees in our yard. And she says, and then I got to thinking that you had just lost your son, and I thought, well, that's silly for me to worry, to be sad about losing trees. And I thought, a loss is a loss, and I don't think there's a degree, some sort of hierarchy that certainly I should judge somebody because, my grief is more than theirs, or theirs is more than mine, or whatever. I think that my job, my part of being part of this humanity, this part of being a Christian, is to be loving and comforting to people, no matter what the loss is.
Well, part of that is people playing the expectations game. I think, we have, is this grief the sort of thing, or is this loss the sort of thing that other people will understand my loss? Am I reacting in the appropriate way to someone else's grief? And so we have all the expectations. I'm noticing on these notes that you wrote here, personal expectations, workplace expectations, and Christian expectations. And I jumped probably straight to the last one, which is because of how commonly I've heard, the two ways into the expectations. One of them was that this must be in God's plan, and this was the best thing for James. And therefore I'm expected to think it's a good thing. And the other is, of course, that James has gone on to be with Jesus, and so I'm supposed to think that the death is a good thing. Now, I want you to understand that I find both God's plan and I find the hope that's set before us of heaven and being with Jesus are both good things. But James is still not here,
That's right.
And 12 years later, as you were talking about, I go out on the road, and where he used to, and driving to school, driving out to high school, where he used to drive by while I was walking, and he would stop and say hello and pat his little dog Barnabas on the head, and then off he'd go. There are days that I still feel that when I walk by there, and I know, but I know the good things, but the grief is still there.
Sure. I mean, I have no doubt as to where James is right now. I also have no doubt that, if the good Lord came up to him and said, James, I'll be glad to send you back, no problem. Yeah, no. Given a choice, no. Heaven's really pretty good, and I think I'll stay here. Thank you very much. But at the same time, we grieve not because we don't have hope. We grieve because it's a loss in our life. It's a hole. It's a tear in the fabric of what we know. And I think that another phrase that I've read is finding the new normal. And that's what this journey of grief is about, is finding my new normal. It's finding my life. It's finding my day-to-day life, as well as life in general, of what I now have. And whether you have lost a loved one, or your job, or your house, or divorce, you have a new normal, and you've got to kind of find your way in that, and find that place of comfort. And I think we find our comfort, as Paul said in 2 Corinthians 1, we find our comfort as others share their comfort with us. And I think that that's the important thing, is that we do not isolate ourselves in our grief. I think one of the people ask me all the time, well, when should I be concerned about somebody when they're grieving? Well, get concerned when they start to isolate themselves. And that, I think, is the important thing, is that we stay connected to each other.
And I would emphasize in speaking, because sometimes we get into the introvert extrovert thing on the connecting ourselves. And I would emphasize two things about that. One being, be aware of what level of social connections the person needed before. If you can pay some attention to that, that's very good. But secondly, realize that even a person who is very much an introvert, as I am, does still need the connections.
Right.
Sometimes, they don't have to be intense and complicated, but there's a need.
Well, and not the same type. I probably would do much better with people actually showing up and, taking me to lunch, and, that would be more my kind of connection. Your connection might be just as appropriate with somebody sending you an email, or somebody just sending you a quick text saying, how you doing today, Henry, or whatever. I think people have different ways, and when we ask ourselves, how can we help somebody, we need to ask ourselves, well, what was our relationship with the person before? And then you take what your relationship, how did you relate to that person before? And you just be more aware of opportunities to do that same thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, that reminds me of, talking to Elgin Hushbeck a couple of weeks ago about the witness, where he said the most important thing was listening. The same thing applies here. The listening and the observation is much more important. And I would emphasize that, because I'm looking here again, when am I going to stop tearing up at unexpected moments? Or grieving. And one of the things that reminded me of and connects to me is being, how shall I say, watching yourself, being aware of what's going on, because my own behavior and response was unexpected to me. I can't expect others to figure out things when I say, I didn't expect it myself. Before I go in, I'm going to say just a couple words about that. Before I go into it, though, I want to remind people, let people know, we have the live chat active through YouTube. Now, if you're watching this embedded on another site, basically, if you look up in that little address bar on your browser and it doesn't say youtube.com up there, it says some other site, then you're embedded in another site. You won't be able to do it, but if you would like to be able to provide questions or comments through the live chat, just go to YouTube, which usually you can just click at the top of the viewer where you are. You go to YouTube, and I have the live chat open here, so we'll be glad to take your comments or questions. And I was just reminded of that because I think a couple of years ago, the first thing that really surprised me was having a rough time during the month of June. Now, I know, have a rough time during the month of September. And September is a gray place for me. I have a hard time tracking what happened in September, but June is another matter. And a couple of years ago, I remember I picked up a picture of John with James that I keep on my desk early in June, and it was like being hit over the head with a hammer. Mm-hmm. And it really stuck with me. And I would have said the last 2 or 3 years before that were easier than that June. So I don't know how helpful that is. I don't think that you can say, and I don't even think that you can plan the intensity of the memories.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is, especially if someone is listening to this and you're coming up now into the fall and about to enter into your first Thanksgiving or your first Christmas after whatever your loss is. And I would have to say that those first holidays are very difficult. And that's because I think, especially in this country, Thanksgiving and Christmas are very much wrapped around family. And whether your loss is the death of a loved one, or like I said, your job or a divorce or whatever, all those things are very wrapped up in family. And the loss is going to make everything shift in that family. And so if you're coming up on your first year, the number one thing, if you don't hear anything else in this broadcast, is for you to do what is best for you this holiday season. Do what you feel like you can do. And if that doesn't fall into line with what everybody else thinks you ought to do, well, that's their problem. Okay. um, the first holiday after James died, we didn't do a lot. I didn't put up Christmas decorations. The older children, had moved away, and of course they'd all been here for the funeral and everything, and so they had family things that they needed to do, and actually it was easier in some ways to have that quietness of the holiday. But at the last minute, I remember we went to Christmas Eve service. We sat in the back, and I remember I had stuck about 5 or 6 Kleenex in my pocket, which was a good thing because I did pretty much tear up through the whole service. But I just think it's important that you do the things that are best for you on that first year. And does it get easier? Yes. The bottom line is it does. Like Henry said, there will be times that the emotion comes rushing back, maybe unexpected times. But Christmas, 12 years later, yes, Christmas 12 years later was a whole lot easier than it was the first Christmas. So I do want to give people that encouragement that it is going to get better. But there's always going to be that difference. Like I said, it's a new normal. It's never going to be, once you've had a significant loss like that, your life, it puts a change in the life, and your life is not going to be the same. It's not going to happen.
Okay. Well, we're going to move in a minute to talk a little bit about the workplace, and then I think to talk more about the Christian view and what's happening in the church. But we have a question now. What would be something you would not recommend saying to someone grieving?
Well, to me, that really goes into the subject you were talking about, Henry, about especially as a Christian. I think we as Christians more often are the ones that say things that are not helpful. When you try to put your explanation on somebody else for the why of things happen, everyone has that why question. Why did this happen? Why did this happen now? Why did this happen to this person and not to another person? Why did it happen in the way that it did? There's always why questions, and no one can answer those why questions for you. That's my opinion. The only one that can answer it is God, to me. And God will answer your why question. You just got to keep getting in his face about it. Don't let up. Don't stop. He is most willing to hear you cry and even shake your fist. I'm here to testify to you that if you shake your fist at God, he will not strike you dead. Okay. He will listen. He will talk to you, and his answer to you, that you will hear about the why question, may not be a totally satisfactory answer, but my prayer would be is that it becomes an answer you can live with. And that's my testimony. My answer to why did my 17-year-old son have to die? The answer that God gave me is one that I can live with. When we meet up in heaven, God and I might have further conversation about it. But right now, I can live with the answer that I have, and the answer that Henry has is different than the answer that I have, and the answer that our son and daughter have is different than the answers we have. And I think that's the wonderful thing about God, is that his answer is specific to your life, to your understanding, to where you are in your faith, and it's the honest answer. So if I was to say one thing to someone, I would say, testify to what God has done for you in your situation. That's fine. But do not try to put your answer onto somebody else, or quote scriptures at them like the scripture is going to be the answer to it. Scriptures can be of encouragement, and I think that encouraging people about God's love, encouraging people about his willingness to listen, about the fact that he will not leave you, that's good. But I think telling someone that you have the answer to their question, I think God's a better one to answer their question. What do you think?
I think I would probably more summarizing than adding. I think in so many things that we do, our problem as Christians is this. We think Jesus is the answer. We have Jesus, therefore we are supposed to have all the answers. And Jesus has answers, but you don't have all of the answers that Jesus has. I don't have all of the answers. And so I don't know and I don't understand are perfectly valid responses, both for your own questions and for others. I'd mentioned the book of Job in the Bible, and I'd mention also a book we have by Bruce Epperly, Finding God in Suffering, A Journey with Job, which is a very good exposition on that book. But one of the key things about the book of Job is this: Job never in the story discovers why it was that he suffered all that. We have an outside story in the first couple of chapters, and then it's concluded in the final chapter. But Job never gets to hear that explanation. In the story, he simply suffers. God shows up. The one answer he gets is that God does approve of him and God is there, even though God thinks he's rather dumb. But I suspect that's pretty much what God thinks about all of us. So that's how it works. I get this answer regularly in church because I read the Bible in Greek and Hebrew. And so people say something like, well, you can answer these questions, but what am I supposed to do since I don't have your knowledge? Actually, being able to read the Bible in Greek and Hebrew does you very little good when somebody comes to you because of a loss in the family, or because their marriage is falling apart, or their life in general is not going well. It's not that you have all of the answers that is most helpful. And so I would say that applies to everything, and this especially is, don't feel like you need to be the person who comes in with all of the right answers to provide people. And also don't expect that having what you think is the right answer is necessarily going to help the person. I think experience, Jody and I taught, we were team teaching, and this was after James had passed away, and there we are giving our different answers. And I wondered, even though I was not going to be less than honest, where the two of us come to some different answers, I wondered how that was going to work. It actually worked very well, because people realized not only did they have two different explanations that they could start to work with, but they also realized that it wasn't necessary to be right. It wasn't necessary to have all the right answers. And I honestly don't know whether I have the right answer about any of this. And like Jody says, I want to be in on that conversation when we meet Jesus. Just what's going on here.
Yeah.
I do, but I think we tend to overemphasize the value of having the right answer.
Yeah. All my years in, I'm getting an echo.
Okay,
all years in hospice, I told all of my nurses I was an educator as well as being a nurse, and all of my years I kept telling my nurses and chaplains and social workers that it was about being present in somebody's life. It was about listening. It was about just being there and letting them tell their story again. I think that in a loss, as you're processing what that loss means, I think that sometimes you need to tell the story several times, because as you talk about it, you get different insights and you get different kinds of perspectives on it. And sometimes until you actually say it with your mouth, you don't, it's like you get a revelation. Something comes out of your mouth and you go, whoa, wait a minute. Yeah, that's right. And so I think that the best thing that we can do is to be present with that person and to listen. And if they want to do something to remember whatever, they want to put together photo albums or scrapbooks, or they want to clean out closets or whatever. If you can be a part of that, be a friend and be a part of that, I think that is worth more than any other pearls of gold that you might think you need to tell them. It's that presence that I think is worth more than gold and silver.
Okay, in a way, that was what God was saying to Job, which is, here I am. I'm the one who knows all of this. I'm the one who made all of this. I'm the one who does everything, and I am here. And then he says, these other people, they haven't served me like my servant Job has. And you go, in what way had Job served God through all of this, except by, going through it? I just think that's such a key point of the tale of Job, the story there, that Job doesn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's probably an answer to the question. I think is the most important thing not to say is, don't say that don't pretend that you know. The person I think who does the most damage is the one who thinks they know everything and have to have an answer for everything. That's when you go off the rails. Now, looking at the time, we have a little bit of a problem, and I think I'm going to do something about it, which is, it being 7:30, I don't think we want to run this more than a half an hour. But I have a couple of comments on being a Christian and the Gospel Commission and grief, and I think I'll write that in a blog post to follow up. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jody could cook one up about something for employers and businesses and grief. So maybe that's an assignment to do a blog post. I do want to mention Jody's book, Grief: Finding the Candle of Light. written with Janet Wilkie, of a social worker. And we have a number of other books on death and dying and the future life. And so I think what I'll do in addition is we'll go ahead and add those to those books on Paul on the sale list. If you want to pick up some books having to do with that, get a collection. Thinking of Epperly's now that I've tried to do this, the title is long. From Here to Eternity is the one that he has, and Journey to the Undiscovered Country by Bill Tuck. And
Charles Lopez is a hospice chaplain who also wrote some reflections on his spiritual care experiences. And the other one that I think is so important is Ron Higdon's Surviving a Son's Suicide. One of the things that you will find in my book is that I do not talk about suicide. To me, that is a whole nother issue of which I don't have personal experience, so I wouldn't begin to assume to tell people what to do in that situation. But Ron Higdon just does a great job of speaking to that from a father's perspective, from a pastor's perspective. Just really, really good job of writing that.
Okay, and also House Calls with Jesus.
Yes, that's a book of ours, which I'm real excited about.
So I'll be putting those on sale. I'll make up a quick resources list that I'll provide a link for here at the end of the video by the time we post it tomorrow on the Energon Discussion Network. And like I said, we'll follow up with a couple of blog posts since we covered like less than half of what we planned. That happens to these things. In the meantime, thanks so much for being with us. And as I said, link to this will be posted on the Energon Discussion Network in the morning, along with those promised resource links. Good night.